It's been a minute since we discussed dragons on this show, so let's fix that. In my quest to dig up every dragon from D&D's history and convert them into 5th edition, we have now covered all the forgotten chromatic dragons, all the fairest dragons, and a few other weirdos along the way. And while there is still one other metallic dragon we need to discuss, today we're taking a bit of a detour. Something we haven't yet delved into are the planar dragons, of which there are about 30. The vast majority of whom have not made it into 5th edition. Am I gonna do videos about all of them? Probably, but I wanted to start with one that is technically a planar dragon, but in my opinion fits perfectly with the cast of metallics that we have, know, and love. The Adamantine dragon. So take a seat, get comfortable, and prepare to learn everything there is to know about these unbreakable draconic warriors. To say the Adamantine dragon is well liked by the D&D community is a bit of an understatement. Even before I started making videos about monsters, I had heard stories about how badass and powerful they are. And after I started making videos, I saw them suggested in the comments just so many times. This episode has been brewing for a while, and with the release of the new monster manual upon us, I figured it was a great time to finally take a crack at the uncrackable dragon. Get it? Because Adamantine is hard? Okay. The Adamantine dragon first appeared back in 1999 as part of the Outer Planes Monstrous Compendium for 2nd edition D&D. A book which features all kinds of weird planar entities such as this thing and that guy. Fun fact, this is also the book that gave us Animal Lords, a creature I know I certainly didn't think would ever appear in an official product again, but the 2024 Monster Manual certainly proved me wrong there, now didn't it? But I was right about sphinxes. There's some weird stuff in this book that we might talk about in the future, but for today we're locking in on the Adamantine dragon, or should I say adamantite dragon, who looks like he just stubbed his toe and is really upset about it. The whole adamantine, adamantite, adamantium thing is kind of wild, but rest assured they are all the same thing, and this dragon, while technically referred to as an adamantite dragon in 2nd edition, is the same creature we're going to be talking about today. If you want to learn more about the etymology of metallurgical terms in D&D, I made a video about an adamantine door that is really funny and very good, which you should go watch after you're done watching this. If you want a real deep dive into the subject though, AJ Pickett also has a great video about metallurgy and D&D that I'll link to in the description down below. The only other appearance made by this dragon is in Dragon Magazine 321, published in July of 2004, where they got some cool new artwork that looks like it belongs on the cover of a heavy metal album, which I guess makes sense considering Mark Sasso, the principal artist, is one of the primary illustrators for Dio's album covers. Oh, hey, 4th edition. You didn't think I forgot about you, did you? No, I totally remembered the Adamantine dragon from your book, the actual last time we saw it in print. In the Monster Manual 2, no less, a mainline creature book. We legally do get an Adamantine dragon stat block, but it does that 4th edition thing where it's bad and no one likes it? I'm mostly kidding. The stats are fine, though they don't resemble anything akin to what the dragon looked like in previous editions, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's also so little lore written for them that their page practically looks like it came from the 2024 Monster Manual. And what little words are there strip away everything that makes these dragons cool and interesting, changing them from fascinating creatures to dragons that live in a cave. So I shall be doing what most people do when it comes to 4E lore, and ignoring it entirely.
Hey, editing dad here. Just a quick note. They actually did include a bunch more lore about adamantine dragons in 4th edition as part of the Draconomicon 2 for metallic dragons. I still don't think it's particularly great, but it does echo some of the lore echoed in previous editions, and it would be dishonest of me not to at least show you that they did try somewhat in this book. Anyways, back to the video.
That said, I really like the art for them in this edition. They managed to still be obviously a dragon while having a few strong visual indicators that this is not to be mistaken for some other variety of draconic creature. I also just like that Koopa looking ass jawline. That's fun. So that's what the new artwork I'm commissioning for them is gonna look like. I guess in a way, this means the 4E legacy survives within this monster if only visually. Good for them. Now, what even the hell is an Adamantine dragon? Well, the opening line of their lore entry in 2nd edition makes one hell of a promise. Adamantite dragons are perhaps the mightiest of dragon kind. Well, I guess that solves the debate then, and truly this is now a thing nobody will ever argue about in the comment section of a YouTube video ever again. Whether they are truly the strongest, that remains to be seen. However, they are certainly extremely tough, which is true of most planar dragons, just as a whole. I mean, the reason this group of dragons is called planar dragons is because they are dragons that come from other planes. Imagine that. And typically, the stuff that lives on other planes is really dangerous. Which brings us to the next big question. Which plane are Adamantine dragons from? These guys hail from the plane of Bitopia, which, much to my disappointment, is not a celestial plane where all good bisexuals go after we die, but rather a celestial plane made up of 2 worlds. This is really tough to explain without a visual element, so for those of you who just listen to my videos, first of all, what the hell, man? I put a lot of effort into my visuals. Secondly, you may want to look over from grinding materials on whatever RPG you're playing and take a look at the screen for just 1 second. I'll even throw up some Subway Surfers footage to keep your attention. Bitopia is split into 2 layers called Shurok and Dothian. Dothian? The other one. Both layers are entire worlds with people who live there and go about their lives. However, when they look up into the sky, they are going to see what to them looks like another world hanging upside down directly above them. In some places, there are even mountains that connect to mountain peaks on the other side, creating these weird rock formations, which, if you're careful, you can actually climb up until you reach the middle, kind of going about this equilibrium of gravity, and then start climbing back down on the other side. Adamantine dragons are native to these worlds and tend to spend most of their time hanging out in the space between the 2 planes so that they can keep an eye on what's happening below and above, which is also below. And just what are they on the lookout for? Well, as good aligned dragons, they're on the lookout for evildoers, of course. And this is why I say that legally, as dragons from another plane, they are planar dragons. The Adamantine dragon is in every other way a member of the metallic family tree. They're of good alignment, they're named after and visually appear aligned with a type of metal, and they despise Tiamat. That's all 3 things. They also have 2 breath weapons and they can polymorph, so that's all 5 things, I guess, but who's counting? They are neutral good in their alignment, and much like gold dragons, they seek to tip the scales in conflicts towards the side of good. However, unlike gold dragons, who tend to take a more hands-off, mystical, I must guide the mortals to the right path kind of approach, Adamantine dragons are absolutely in the shit. If you were to consider gold dragons to be the clerics of dragonkind, Adamantine dragons are absolutely the paladins. To quote the infamous bard Waka Flocka Flame,
I go hard in the motherfucking paint.
With scales that seem to deflect even the most gruesome blows and massive claws that rip through practically any substance like butter, an Adamantine dragon spells trouble for anyone who ends up on the wrong side of their wrath. And they aren't just good at fighting, they like fighting. If an Adamantine dragon sees an opportunity to get involved in a situation where there's justice to be meted out on some bad guys, they will in no uncertain terms be leading the charge. They, like all metallic dragons, have 2 breath weapons, the first of which is a line of white-hot flames, perfect for incinerating the villainous, which can also be cast as a cone. Their second only functions once per day, so it's limited in its use, but it is a cone of gas that slows the victim's perception of time, essentially paralyzing them in place at worst, or causing them to be sluggish and slow at best, both of which make for very effective tools on the battlefield. They aren't entirely without mercy though, and won't jump straight to violence if violence is not required, but you better believe that if violence is required, or even just a strong option, they're more than prepared to rip and tear until it's done. It is worth mentioning that they care very little for heady concepts like the balance between law and chaos, or other more nuanced, debatable ideas. They also don't really care all that much about unintelligent life. They specifically are about protecting intelligent and sentient life forms from threats made against them, as they simply refuse to stand by and witness suffering when something can be done about it. Is the Dark Lord marching an army across the land, hell-bent on subjugating anyone unable to fight back? Great. call up our boy. In fact, the dragon's probably already on its way. Are there corrupt politicians enacting policies within the kingdom that will likely lead to economic collapse of the middle class and ultimately result in mass poverty many years down the line? If left unchecked, the dragon's probably not gonna do much. It's hard to beat up a failing economy. Maybe call it like, I don't know, an assassin. My point is, adamantine dragons are much more concerned with tangible threats that can be taken head on, and not with more nuanced evils that creep within societies. Which is honestly quite ironic given that most of them will spend a lot of time interacting with said societies. And that brings us to our next topic. Just where exactly do these dragons tend to hang out? Well, one place that comes to mind is Knoxville, Tennessee. Yeah, you know, at Green Dragon Fest, this week's video sponsor. Damn, what a sick transition. Green Dragon Fest is an event taking place this year from May 1st to the 4th in the ancient LAIR village, which is basically if you took Hobbiton, moved it across the sea, and stocked the kitchen with S-tier barbecue and whiskey. It's a whole weekend of playing tabletop games with some awesome creators, eating amazing food, and hanging out in a locale taken straight from a fantasy novel. I was there last year and got to run games for some awesome people. I had a ton of fun doing it, and I know this year is going to be even bigger and better. They have an amazing roster of folks like Bob Worldbuilder, Professor Dungeon Master, Kelsey Dion, and so many others. The tickets are all inclusive, so the only thing you have to be worrying about for an entire weekend is what horrific monsters from my catalog of creatures will be crossing paths with your hero. It's gonna be some gnarly ones. That said, tickets are going pretty fast, and as of time of recording, there are only 3 spots left within the actual ancient LAIR village, and there are only 20 general admission tickets, which don't get you into the hobbit hole as far as your accommodations, but for folks who want to save some cash staying somewhere else, or happen to be local, get you everything else the event includes. There's early bird pricing right now, though only until the end of March, and honestly, I doubt the tickets will last that long anyways. So if you want to play D&D with me or one of the other folks on screen right now, check out the link in the description and take a look for yourself. I can personally attest to how much fun this event was last year. I'm really looking forward to it again, and hopefully I'll even see a few of you there. And who knows, an adamantine dragon just might show up. Speaking of, well, I'm sure they would enjoy the festivities of GDF, let's talk about where these creatures actually make their lairs. Adamantine dragons typically live nearby humanoid settlements, often establishing their lair in a spot that is equidistant from multiple settlements. That way, if they should ever need to intervene and provide assistance to any of them, they're never too far away. Unlike many other dragons though, they tend to get directly involved with the people nearby and often straight up make introductions, allowing the people to know that they are there and that they are now under the dragon's purview. It kind of gives me Batman vibes, except instead of the bat signal, they probably have the town construct a massive signal fire or something that they can light if they ever need help. But this deal is not strictly one way. As these dragons age, they not only become more powerful, but they become more intelligent, eventually gaining a tactical expertise that makes them invaluable as military advisors or generals in large-scale conflict. But no dragon is gonna simply join a king's army. They're gonna form their own. Usually with the aid of humanoid settlements the adamantine dragon safeguards, they will construct massive fortresses and citadels to act as their lair and stronghold to command their army from. These strongholds are usually quite impressive, boasting a wide variety of facilities for housing and training soldiers, as well as accommodating the dragon in its natural form. Because while they can polymorph themselves into a humanoid shape, many adamantine dragons prefer to remain in their true draconic form if possible. But in addition to these massive citadels, the dragons will typically amass followers who want to serve in the dragon's army. I mean, they're not out here conscripting people or anything, but it's very common for would-be soldiers to seek membership in an adamantine dragon's army simply because they believe in the goal of protecting the lands they call home. Plus, you're not gonna get better training or access to weaponry anywhere else. Speaking of, when it comes to the dragon's horde, weaponry is the word of the day. Adamantine dragons will indeed amass wealth, which they use primarily for funding their castles and armies. However, their true hoard is often a collection of powerful magic weapons, which they sometimes bestow on the most fearsome warriors in their service. But even barring special weapons gifted to their best soldiers and commanders, most soldiers serving in an adamantine dragon's army have weapons forged from, you guessed it, Adamantine. The dragon's scales make for excellent shields, or smelted down can serve as incredible swords and spears. And while adamantine weaponry is very hard to come by, the dragons not only have a somewhat renewing supply of it on account of their scales literally being made of the stuff, they also possess a breath weapon which burns hot enough to make the unbendable material somewhat bendable. The other thing we need to discuss is the regional effects imposed by this dragon and its lair. Because back in the good old days, we didn't have rules for the regional effects imposed by a dragon, and now we do. All that is just to say, I had to make all this stuff up entirely from scratch. So I gave them 2 lair effects which I felt were appropriate thematically for a creature like this. The first is called Hallowed Grounds. Within 1 mile of the dragon's lair, the entire area is under the effect of a hallow spell, which means a few things. For one, a specific type of creature chosen by the dragon among aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, or undead cannot willingly enter the area. I feel like most of the time it's gonna choose undead or fiends, but who knows, maybe the dragon has a reason to put a hate on for elementals that day. This also means anyone possessed, frightened by, or charmed by the chosen creature type who enters this area is immediately released from whatever it is that's affecting them so long as they remain within a mile of the lair. The second effect of Hallow is typically one of 10 different things you choose when you cast the spell, but just for ease of use, I simply have the second effect predetermined as the Peaceful Rest option, which prevents interred and dead bodies in the area from being turned into undead. If you want to change that to one of the other effects, be my guest, but for simplicity's sake, I went with the one I felt was most straightforward and generally seemed to be something the dragon would be on board with kind of at all times. But that brings us to our second lair effect, which is called Bonded Guardianship, which is a kind of weird but ultimately cool use of a spell we don't really see busted out all too often. This one allows the dragon to cast the spell Warding Bond, requiring no material components on up to 6 creatures at once who are all within 1 mile of the lair. Meaning that if you're nearby and the dragon wants to keep you safe, you're gonna be kept pretty safe. And if you're an enemy of the dragon, any resistance you encounter along the way to its lair might be getting some extra help from behind the scenes. And either way, that seems like a cool component to add to an encounter, if you ask me, potentially allowing the players to take on something a bit stronger than them, or potentially making some weaker creatures much more resilient that the players have to come up against. Speaking of behind the scenes though, let's pop the hood on this bad boy and see exactly how all of these abilities work. As some of the biggest and baddest draconic creatures around, the Adamantine dragon absolutely needs mechanics that feel both dangerous and, as always, unique. We all know the biggest problem with dragons, generally speaking, is that they can feel kind of samey sometimes if you're not careful. The return of spellcasting to dragons in the new 5th edition Monster Manual does a lot to remedy that, and I've come up with a few things that I think will make this dragon into a true terror worthy of its reputation. But first and foremost, we gotta know, what's this guy's breath weapon all about? Like all metallic dragons, they've got 2 options, the first of which is white hot flames. The fire exhumed by this dragon is not just your typical dragon fire though, it is so hot that it bypasses resistance to fire damage, but not straight up immunity. So this isn't gonna do anything to the fire elemental on the other side of the room, but the tieflings among us should be a little bit more cautious than usual. I mean, just as cautious as the rest of the party. Tough life. They also have the option to spit this fire as a line, which doesn't give them the same amount of area, but does make it go much farther. Its other breath weapon, however, is the true killer. This option is so powerful that the dragon can only use it once per day, but when it does, watch out. The dragon's slowing breath allows it to emit a cone of gas, which alters the way the affected creatures perceive the passage of time around them. If you fail your save, you're straight up paralyzed for 1 minute. And if you pass the save, while not paralyzed, you are slowed for a minute, which means you have a -2 to your armor class and dexterity saving throws, and you lose the ability to take reactions. And again, that's what happens if you make the save. You do get to make a save at the end of each of your turns to shirk the effects. However, if you're paralyzed, once you do make that first save, you just become slowed, meaning you have to make a second save to fully rid yourself of the effects. Now, like I said, the dragon can only do this once per day, but what a ridiculously powerful tool to employ if it needs to. Because keep in mind, If you are paralyzed and someone within 5 feet of you makes an attack, it's automatically a critical hit if it connects. Which is bad, especially considering that the Adamantine Dragon's rend attack hits like a goddamn truck. Also, seeing as how they have claws of adamantine, their attacks follow the same rules for adamantine weapons, meaning if they hit an object with their rend attack, it's automatically a crit as well. So maybe, instead of going for direct damage, the dragon decides to sunder someone's weapon or a particularly useful piece of equipment. And for those of you who are wise in the ways of adamantine rules for 5th edition, you'll also know that wearing adamantine armor makes you immune to critical hits. So this dragon, even from the Wormling stage, has the Adamantine Scales trait, meaning any critical hit against it is instead just treated as a normal hit. Now, crits aren't typically a huge consideration when you're building an encounter, but we've all seen it go both ways. A lucky crit or two can drastically change the tide of a combat situation, looking at you paladins, and the fact that this dragon is basically immune to that extenuating circumstance is certainly something to think about. But moving on to magic. Once they reach the adult size category, these dragons get access to a bunch of really useful spells. Like all metallics, they can cast shape change to appear as a beast or humanoid of some kind. They can also bust out spells like detect magic and dispel magic to, well, detect and dispel magic. And in combat, using their multi-attack, they can even replace one of their attacks with a casting of dispel magic, so if they're facing off against an enemy who relies on a lot of spells and magical buffs, they might need a new strategy. Adamantine dragons also have a host of useful defensive spells like Blink, Mirror Image, and Dimension Door, as well as Banishment for those times when they just need someone to go away for a minute. They also have access to Dispel Evil and Good, which is a situational but very useful spell when it does come up. Though once they reach the ancient size category, they also get access to Power Word Stun and Reverse Gravity, which are both spells you really don't want to be on the receiving end of, but make perfect sense for this dragon to have. I mean, to be so honest, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're fighting an ancient adamantine dragon, why? Like, at some point you have made a critical blunder that just led you down this path. What are you doing?
Stop it. Get some help.
Now, all those spells are taken straight from the creature's spell list as it appeared in 3rd and 2nd edition. However, I thought of 2 new additions to the magical roster that just felt fitting to me. The first is the spell Hallow. Hallow is not a spell that's going to be super useful in combat, but it thematically fits really well with the idea of these dragons being good-aligned protectors of the innocent, giving them the ability to essentially ward off an area as safe for their allies and other creatures who aren't fiends, undead, or one of the other malignant extraplanar menaces that can be targeted with this spell. That just makes sense to me. This also sort of ties in with one of their LAIR effects which I gave them, so the logic is sound, I think. But the second spell I gave them access to is a spell that I believe probably would have been on their list back in 3rd edition if it existed. I mean, it did exist, but only as a class feature, so it would have been too clunky to employ. Not that 3rd edition particularly cared about that. I'm of course talking about good old Divine Smite. As soon as I first made the Paladin Cleric comparison in my head between these guys and Gold Dragons, I knew what I had to do. See, as someone who plays a lot of Paladins, I am of course so sad to see Divine Smite become a spell instead of a class feature. How could they do it to us?
Look how they massacred my boy.
But on the flip side, I get to put it on this dragon spell list now. So it's a bit of give and take.
Editing Dad here again. It's been a hot minute since I played 3rd edition D&D, and I totally forgot when I wrote this script that Smite was absolutely a spell in 3.5, and it was a class feature that worked in a much different way than what we're used to in 5th edition. All this really means is that the original designers of the dragon have no excuse for missing their chance to put a Holy Smite on its spell list, but I could practically hear the comments all the way from Canada, so here we are. Anyways, back to it.
The idea of a dragon having the ability to cast Smite goes insanely hard, and if you don't think that's the dopest shit ever, I don't know what to tell you. The dragon does, of course, also have some legendary actions, which, as always, did not exist in 3rd edition, so I had to add them in there myself. The first I came up with is called Fearsome Stomp, which basically allows the dragon to unleash a big old stomp and scare the shit out of everyone around it, maybe even knock some of them prone. pretty straightforward, makes sense. The second thing is kind of like the interception fighting style, but cranked up to CR25. This legendary action allows the dragon to move up to half its speed and then provide a +2 bonus to any creatures it chooses within 10 feet of it. That bonus goes up to +3 at the ancient category, and honestly just seems like a really cool and thematic way for this dragon to get involved in combat, trying to protect some of its buds. I just picture it charging on in from across the battlefield and spreading out its wings. I think that's sick. The final legendary action just allows it to make a rend attack and cast Smite, because of course it does. At the ancient category, the Smite is cranked up to level 5, so have fun with that. Ultimately, I think these dragons are very interesting mechanically, have a lot of unique and exciting tools to bust out at the game table, and whether they're functioning as an ally or an enemy are sure to provide one hell of an encounter. Speaking of, let's talk about how we can actually use this dragon at the game table with a few. So needless to say, like all dragons, the appearance of an adamantine dragon should be something thought out if it's gonna happen in your game. If you just happen to be running a game within the plane of Bitopia or somewhere else that it would be appropriate for one of these guys to show up, and you want it to be a random encounter, go nuts. You're allowed. I literally can't stop you. But I would think first and foremost, it's important to consider how these dragons fit in with the other dragons who may or may not be in your world. Personally, I think the extra planar stuff is cool, but it also very seldom comes up in adventures I run. I don't do a lot of stuff that takes place off of the material plane. So I really like the idea of simply folding them in with the other metallic dragons, just adding the adamantine dragon as a member of their family. They fit really well with the rest of them and provide unique perspectives, abilities, and possible adventures while still holding to the things that make metallic dragons recognizable as a group.
Wait, you dig on multiverses?
If you really dig the planar stuff and have more expansive adventures happening in your game, by all means, stick to the original lore. But even if you do, these dragons are versatile enough that one could easily end up on the material plane. Maybe it found its way through a gateway as a wormling and decided to stay, or is unable to find a way back home. That in and of itself could be a little adventure where the party is trying to help this lost wormling get back to where they came from. I actually love using this dragon in the wormling category specifically because even as what is essentially a child, these creatures are CR4, which is pretty deadly all things considered. Maybe an adamantine wormling and its mission to rid the land of evil is what actually gets the party involved with the grand plot. Perhaps they're helping the young dragon find some kind of evil artifact so that it might be destroyed. Or maybe they're out here trying to take down a notorious bandit gang that has been harassing and in some cases killing local townsfolk. Or maybe the young dragon here receives some false information and mistakes the party for a group of bad guys, and they have to try and convince the dragon that they are indeed actually not villains lest they face its wrath. And I mean, that could work at multiple tiers of play. Maybe the party's actually made up primarily of criminals who have been given a chance by the dragon to get right and correct their past misdeeds. You could run a campaign where the party has to prove themselves worthy of a second chance by taking on missions from the dragon to better the world. There is also always the possibility of using this dragon as the primary antagonist of your game. And if you happen to be running a game for a group of less than reputable adventurers, perhaps a party that's proven themselves villainous in some way, and they end up on the wrong side of an adamantine dragon, that could be interesting. Most certainly a dangerous enemy to have. I do also love using dragon layers just as points of interest where the effects surrounding them come into play somehow. If you're using my draconic lair effects, perhaps the hallowed ground near the dragon's lair is a traditional burial ground for the settlements who live nearby because they know that it's sanctified from the forces of undeath. This could just be a neat little world detail, you know, something for the players to say cool about as they pass through on a carriage, but maybe it's a primary plot point. Maybe the area is actually rife with necrotic energy and the dragon is the only thing holding it back with its mere presence. But then, the dragon disappears. Avatar style. Has it been slain by evil forces? Has it abandoned the towns it once protected? Or a secret third thing. The party could be on a quest just to find out what the hell is going on and bring the dragon back home before it's too late, maybe even restoring it to life if it's been killed. I'm picturing a scenario where a lich has slain the dragon and raised it from the dead as a Draco Lich or some other final epic confrontation, where the party has to slay the creature in its undead form before they can use magic to bring it back to life so it exists as it was before. Or maybe the party is just stuck back in whatever town they're from, now dealing with an outpouring of the undead, which is a classic D&D campaign, but with the interesting twist of the dragon's involvement, however it may come up. Adamantine dragons, especially as they get up there in age, are extremely potent battle commanders and generals as well. They are almost always going to be leading armies into battle, Alexander the Great style, but even when it's not time for a shift of putting bad guys to the sword, they are relentless in their dedication to any cause they become attached to. Imagine a commander of an army who has hundreds of years of experience both on the front lines and as a tactician. What an invaluable asset to any military. So if the dragon is in an antagonistic role, even if the party isn't fighting the creature toe to toe just yet, they're still going to be dealing with the threat of a tactical genius commanding all the minions they do go up against. And if the dragon is an ally to them, maybe they're the ones going on missions on the dragon's behalf, existing as part of its army, taking on special tasks to further the war effort. Adamantine dragons, as creatures who are so directly involved in the battles they participate in, are also prime candidates for the so good they're bad trope. You know the one, a villain who just gets so lost in the sauce of justice and righteous fury that they end up becoming something of a tyrant themselves. Perhaps a campaign that begins with the Adamantine dragon as a capable ally pivots to a situation where the dragon is the antagonist and the players get to see firsthand how the creature's generally just motives, coupled with their near ageless perspective, which all dragons have, causes the creature to shift towards more and more heinous deeds. How far will the party let things go before saying enough and stepping in to stop the dragon's potential tyranny? If you want something less directly related to the dragon itself, I do like the idea of some NPC who is possessed or taken over in some way, like being charmed by an extraplanar creature who just lives at the dragon's lair, because as long as they stay within that 1 mile radius, they are no longer influenced by whatever that extraplanar threat is. Like a guy who's housing a horrible demon inside of him, but as long as he stays close to the lair, everyone is safe from this thing busting on out. That could even be a really interesting story hook where the players are hired to do a jailbreak and bust some guy out of the dungeons in this castle keep. Little do they know the castle is an adamantine dragon's lair, and as soon as they bust this guy out and take him across the threshold of being a mile away from the lair, this horrible demon is gonna explode out of him, and now they have to deal with the repercussions of that. This is why you don't take jobs from cultists. But no matter how you choose to employ this massive winged warrior, adamantine dragons are truly spectacular. I like them, and I hope you find a place to use them in one of your games at some point in the future. As always, the stat block for this creature is linked in the description down below in the form of a Google document, wherein you will find everything you need to run this creature at all age categories, along with their lore and all the extra tidbits and the new artwork and all that stuff. And if you're one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, you will find the high-res PDF stat block, which contains all the same information, but is a little bit fancier and more put together in its presentation, which primarily is there to give you something cool to stick in your DM folder and give me a few bucks to help keep this channel running. And if you don't have the extra cash to throw my way on Patreon, something you can do that is free is subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed already, and like the video if you did, maybe even leave a comment. All that stuff helps me out tremendously. Plus, then you won't miss any videos about cool new monsters. And with the new changes to the YouTube algorithm, who knows how that's gonna change? I laugh because if I don't, I will cry. Also, I need to give a huge shout out to this week's randomly selected Patron of the Week. Thank you so much to Chosen of Horus. Your heresy shall be overlooked this time. And thank you so much for watching. It truly means the most, and if you made it to this part of the video, congratulations. I don't have a prize for you, but What a good day. As always, if there's a monster you would like to see on this channel from a previous edition of D&D, maybe from Pathfinder or another RPG, or just a thing from history that somehow hasn't gotten made into an RPG monster yet that you think would be cool, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know in the Dungeon Dad Discord on the Creature Suggestions chat, and who knows? You might just see it show up on an episode of Monster of the Week. Also, in case you forgot, I wasn't kidding about that Adamantine door video. I made a whole video about a door. It's only like 10 minutes, but that's a lot considering it's about a door. You should go watch it. It is very funny. And if you've already watched it, hell yeah. I know things have been kind of weird on YouTube lately, but I was genuinely surprised that not more people were into that one. I thought it was very funny. Like, I don't even mean me, the jokes I'm making or the things I'm saying in the video, like just the content of that video and the thing I am explaining is ridiculous. I'll link to that too. It's a good time. I feel like I'm overselling it. It's an alright time. You'll probably enjoy it. There, now we've lowered expectations, so if it's as good as I think it is, you'll be really impressed, and if it's just kind of mid, then like whatever. Anyways, that's all I got for you this week. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.